let's go to, let's look at your final exam review, and let's make sure that we're hitting what we need to hit. I would like to go to the section that talks about trust monies, because there are a few things in there. Let's go there next, if you will, so we can move around a little tiny bit. And I'm on page 632. Look at your bottom right paragraph on page 632, handling trust funds. This section addressed those aspects of handling trust funds that are taught in the real estate broker pre-license course and tested on the real estate license exam for entry-level brokers. So we need to make sure we understand this. And then they say, you know, all brokers are encouraged to take the basic trust account course. Well, I think it would be interesting to take it. I've never taken it. I've thought about it before, but you know, I think most brokers these days are having somebody else handle their trust account. Wayne probably might have mentioned it to you, that a lot of real estate companies will have an attorney handle their trust account instead of having it there in-house, because it is a major accounting kind of a job. So let's look at what trust money is. Trust money is money belonging to others that comes into your possession. And so you're an agent and you've received some monies. Now, look at some of the examples of trust money. We already know earnest money deposit is trust money, don't we? It's the property of the buyer. It generally comes with the offer, and it must go into this separate account where it's protected. It's protected. It has to be an FDIC insured bank or savings and loan, and it's protected when the word trust is on the check. When the word trust is on the trust account, is on the deposit slip. The terminology trust account or escrow account lets the bank know that should this real estate company end up in some kind of bankruptcy or something like that, that account that has the word trust on it or escrow on it or custodial account is somebody else's money. And when it's somebody else's money, that account will not be frozen if your company's going through bankruptcy or something. So it's a nice holding account. I can remember writing an offer one time, and the buyer was a first-time buyer. And we talked, and I said, beg your pardon, I asked him how much earnest money would you like to write with this offer. The buyer said, I didn't know I'd have to write a check today. And so we talked about it, and then I used these words. I said, the check will be held in escrow. Well, that's a little bit of a misleading statement, because he asked me, you mean it doesn't have to be a good check? It'll be held. And it doesn't mean we're holding it, literally. It has to be a good check, because it's going to get deposited and it has to clear. But you know what? We assume people know the words we're using and what they mean, and not everybody understands the terminology. Even a word like that, we're going to hold it in trust. And so down payments, tenant security deposit. Why would rents be a trust account money?
If for some reason they move out in the middle of the month, you have to prorate their rent.
Okay.
Like if they skip, then you prorate their rent in the middle of the month, and so some of that money actually goes back to them.
Yeah, but so why does it go into the company's trust account instead of the checking account? Why does it go into the trust account instead of a business operating account, I should say?
It's a deposit.
All money has to be accounted for?
It's a deposit, so it's potentially a possibility that they get that back.
It's rent. Rent's not a deposit, is it? Guys, rent, here's the simple answer. I don't, we're not gonna argue on tape. I'm gonna be nice. Here's the simple answer. It's monies of others. So when a renter makes a rent check payable to your company, it's not your money. It goes into a trust account because it's money of others. And what you said was correct, and somebody else made a statement. What you said is correct, and Kevin too, but,
I thought you said deposit.
huh?
I thought you said deposit.
Oh, trust account, yeah. It would be deposited, but in a trust account, and it's because it's money of others. Now, a trust account, everybody's gonna be a checking account, because when the money comes in, isn't the idea that it's gonna go out too? So you've got to have it in a checking account, but with the words trust or escrow. Alrighty, homeowners association dues, money received from final settlement. Remind yourself, due diligence fee, option fee are not trust account monies, are they? Who is the check made out to if there's a due diligence fee? Seller. Who's the option fee written out to? Seller, called optionor, right? Your trust account, look at your bullets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 at the bottom of the page. It's a separate account from the operating business account. Custodial is another word because the broker in charge is responsible for this if they have the trust account, and they're in the custodial of it. They're the keeper, they're the overseer of the money. What does it mean when it says it's available on demand? It must be available on demand.
You have to be able to cash it the day that you get it. So it has to be readily available.
Readily available. So when this sum money gets deposited in an FDIC insured bank or savings and loan, when it's deposited and after it clears, if this sum, if we have a closing right away, the check can be written and it can be deposited. Or if the buyer and if the sales contract falls through because of due diligence, if it's terminated, well then earnest money would go back to the buyer, wouldn't it, if they walk away in due diligence. So in other words, Kristen said it well, it's readily available. In other words, the trust account is not an account like a CD where you have to give notice in order to get it out. It's readily available. You can write the check, it's exchangeable like your checking account. Alrighty. Location, remember that the bank has to be in North Carolina or in another state that does business in North Carolina. Now if you look at your top right, they're talking about timeshares here, aren't they? Timeshare sales. They're saying that if deposits come with a timeshare purchase, that deposit needs to be made immediately, no later than 3 banking days from receipt. And then and rents would have to be deposited immediately too, everybody, no later than 3 banking days from receipt. The terminology deposit, though, in like security deposit and earnest money deposit, when do we deposit those? What's the rule on that? When is earnest money?
5 days of the contract.
Okay. 3 days. And it is contract, like Kurt said. So let me just say the way that you need to write your notes down. Earnest money deposit check must be deposited immediately, no later than 3 banking days from contract. So if the buyer and seller are offering and counter-offering and negotiating, that earnest money is probably not going to be deposited, although your reading said the broker in charge could deposit it. Y'all remember reading that? The broker in charge could deposit it. Everyone, that would probably be a little bit extra accounting work, because what if the broker in charge deposits the earnest money deposit check before we have a contract? And then we don't have a contract. In other words, we're in the offering stages and the BIC says, I want to just get it in the trust account, for safekeeping. Well, if that counter offering and going back and forth does not ripen into a contract, well, that earnest money is supposed to be, back to the buyer, isn't it? Well, if the bid deposited, they're gonna have to wait until it clears. And then there's gonna be accounting, journal, and all of the type of accounting that a CPA or a bookkeeper would be doing, and it would be really unnecessary, is what I'm trying to say. But the earnest money deposit check needs to be in safekeeping, for sure. So that reminds me, while you're on provisional broker status, you receive an earnest money deposit check with an offer to purchase. We give it to the broker in charge, when? Immediately, because aren't they the ones that are responsible for it? What would you do with a due diligence fee check or an option fee check?
Give it to the seller.
When?
Soon as possible. After the sign contract.
After contract. So as soon as possible after it turns into a contract, Elliot. Because while we're negotiating, the seller shouldn't have that money because it's going to be made out to them. They can check it, cash it, can't they? So when it turns into a contract, yes, as soon as possible. Guys, in your reading, it says it a little tiny bit differently. I would advise you to come back here and read this. Here's what it says. The agent, excuse me, the agent is to give that due diligence fee check or the option fee check, and I'm going to use Elliot's words, immediately after the offer ripened into a contract, unless the buyer says don't give it to them. Now that's a little bit strange because they just negotiated it in the offer to purchase and contract. If the buyer said, because it's his check until you give it to the seller, if the buyer says don't deliver it, then you would have to listen to what the buyer tells you. Now, I think that might lead to some other things. What do we do now? Seller accepted this offer and they expect to see the due diligence fee, but if the buyer says don't give it, you can't give it.
Is there a time frame for the seller to deposit that check after they've received it? Like, do they have to deposit it within a certain amount of time just to show that they did receive it?
Janet's asking a good question. Janet said, well, when you give the due diligence fee check to the seller, is there a time frame on when they need to cash that check or deposit it for proof that it was there? I would, not that I know of, but I would advise my seller to cash it immediately. Wouldn't y'all? I mean, because that's the due diligence fee, that's what you're getting for the time frame that the buyer's gonna be deciding. I would cash it immediately. Because it could be, they could cancel the check, anything could happen, could. All righty, so let's talk about on page 633, I mentioned to you, right-hand column, that the trust account must be designated. It must be FDIC insured. And in your reading it says FDIC insured means that each person's money is insured up to $250,000. They're not saying the whole account is insured up to $250,000, it's each person's money. Why is that important? Why would that be important to know? Why would you want to know that if you were a buyer?
To know that it's secure.
To know it's secure?
And it's only one side of the transaction?
One side of the transaction?
In the same trust account, because you're only supposed to have one, there's multiple people's money if you have multiple deals. So
You're
each
supposed to have one what?
individual- You're only supposed to have one trust account.
No, you can have more trust accounts, but all you need is one.
Oh,
Here's the reason. What if this buyer who wrote the earnest money deposit check banks at that bank? And what if they have a lot of money in that bank, like savings or CD? And what if it's a lot of money, like close to that $250,000, and then they gave the earnest money, let's say $5,000 or $10,000. If it goes over that $250 threshold, they're only insured up to $250. Are you following me on that? So if that buyer, if you tell them what bank your company's trust account is, they might say, I would rather have my check deposited in another bank where I know that it's insured because I'm already sort of at the limit. Now, I can't imagine that would happen very much to us that we hear that, but it could happen. I've got a lot of money in that one bank that you're using, put my deposit in another bank to protect both monies.
Does a balance check void the contract?
What now?
Does a balance check void the contract?
Does a bounce check void the contract? What do y'all think? I would think no. I think I don't think it would, because what kind of check? What kind of check? Earnest money or due diligence?
Either way,
Neither one of those is required to make a contract valid.
but isn't it a part of the material facts of the contract?
It is part of what they negotiated. I think there would be an issue, but I don't think that's gonna void it. What I think is that person's in breach. And so breach is different than void, isn't it? And so there'll be recourse there.
So breach can be fixable, but it's not voidable.
Breach means that it's broken, somebody's in breach, they broke the contract, and if their check bounced, you're in breach. Our sales contract says something like this. If the check bounces, the seller gives 24 hours written notice to that person that their money bounced. 24 hours notice that you need to make that check right within one banking day. And if that person doesn't make it right in one banking day, the seller can terminate the contract. Guys, let me show you where that is on the contract. That's a good test question. Let me show you where that is. Marcus is bringing up something really good that you might need to see. Page 274. Bottom of page 274. Now, Marcus said, does a bounce check void the contract? And we think the answer is no. The answer is no. Look at the last paragraph on the bottom of 274. This is your Form 2T, the standard offer to purchase, the realtor standard form. Should the buyer fail to deliver the due diligence or any initial earnest money by their due dates, or should a check or other funds be dishonored for any reason, the buyer shall have one banking day after written notice by the seller to make the funds immediately available. If the buyer does not timely deliver the cash or immediately available would be a bank check, like a certified bank check. Seller shall have the right to terminate this contract upon written notice to the buyer. So that's contractual. If they use this contract, that would be what happened. Does that make sense? Okay. All righty, back to page 633. Let's move on over to when is a trust account required? When is a trust account required?
Whenever you open the bid on other people's money.
When you're taking other people's money, right? All righty, let me tell you something I might not have told you before. There is a business where people can manage homeowners associations. Didn't we talk about that? And they don't have a license to do that, need a license to do that. If a person is managing homeowners associations, they would have to have a trust account for each association. In other words, if they're managing 5 different neighborhoods, they're not going to put all those funds together in one account. It would have to be a separate account. If your real estate company has brokerage, which is listing and sales, and then they also do property management, only one trust account is necessary. They could have property management in that trust account, and they can have brokerage in that trust account, although it might make sense to separate it and have two. A property manager can have one trust account for security deposits and the rent, Or he might say, I want my security deposits in one trust account and the rent to be in another. That's doable too. Here's a really good example. What if you work for a real estate company and you have investment property? If you have investment property, or you even own the company and have investment property, your personal security deposit from your investment property should not go into the company's trust account. It would need to go into your own trust account that you set up. That would be commingling. Does everybody understand that? So if you own the company and you were a broker in charge, and one of your agents had some investment property and they got a rent or they got security deposit, they cannot put it in the company trust account. They would need to open up their own trust account. Guys, anybody can open a trust account. You don't have to be a real estate broker to open it. And so having your own personal trust account for your own property, that would be the right thing to do, not mixing it up with the company. All righty, go with me over to bottom of 634, where we talk about bank charges. Everyone, this is a wonderful little test question area. When you go to open a trust account, any bank account, that lender is probably going to say, well, there are going to be certain monthly service charges, right? Probably. Or if you're ordering checks at the bank, they might run it through that account. There are going to be check fees. Well, if you're paying bank service fees out of a trust account, you're using somebody else's money, aren't you? You can't do that. The commission says that if you have a trust account, and if there are service fees tied to that account, you can put in some of the company money, up to about $100 of company money, to handle bank service charges. Better yet, ask that bank to send you a separate bill so you can just pay that money out of your operating business account. If you go to the bank to open the trust account and you're talking to the loan officer, and they say, golly, if you go ahead and put $500 in this account, there won't be any service fees. Guys, you can't do that. Because it's not your money, right? You can't do that. It'd be commingling. Now, they gave you an example. What if you have a trust account and the yearly expenses are about $100 for service charges? The commission says you can also put in there a little more, like $100 more, because it could, for any overage or anything. So needs to be fairly minimum the amount of money that you keep in the trust account that belongs to your company, or else it'll be commingling.
You couldn't pay it in advance and put, if it's $100 a month, put $1,200 for the year?
I don't think so.
Because it's $100 a month though.
I know. Yeah, I don't think so. I've never seen that.
Okay.
So I think it makes sense, but I think the way the way it reads, you can have about $100 in there every month. Because after all, this account would have to be reconciled every month, right? And any kind of interest that's accumulating would have to be out of there every month. Guys, on our listing agreement and on our sales contract, there is a section that says, can this be interest bearing? And if the parties agree to that, along with that paragraph, it would say, and who gets to keep the interest? Most times it's the real estate broker for the maintenance of the account. If you are in an interest-bearing account and you're accumulating interest, it cannot stay in there and accumulate indefinitely. You would have to reconcile that account and write a check out to whoever's getting the interest every month. So it cannot just compound. You're making money off of somebody else's money like that, more than covering the bank fees.
And that's illegal, or you should do it?
Do what?
Is that illegal
What?
to get the interest?
You can get the interest as long as it's in writing and the parties agree. So on the listing agreement, I believe it's on the listing agreement, so if the seller signs that, then they've agreed. On the sales contract, it's on there too, because the earnest money is going into a trust account. And so the parties would have to agree that it can be in an interest-bearing account, and the escrow agent gets to keep the money for the maintenance of the account, for the service charges. That's legal, as long as it's in writing and the parties agree to it.
And the escrow agent would be the big.
The BIC or an attorney or something like that. Yeah, Mark has said, and the escrow agent would be the broker in charge. If the broker in charge has the trust account, it wouldn't be me and you. You know, it would be the BIC at the firm, or if the firm says, we want a lawyer to handle our trust account, it'd be him or her. All righty, go with me now, if you will, to page 635, left-hand column. Disputed trust funds. Now, everyone, that came up in your reading along the way. That came up in the sales contract, I believe, disputed trust funds. What is that about? Somebody help me out here. Why wouldn't the monies be in dispute? Number one, why would trust funds be in dispute? Now, trust fund and any funds that would be in trust would be like earnest money deposit, right? Not the due diligence fee, earnest money deposit.
Like someone probably breaching or party breaching and somebody that wasn't aware they want the money back, or like probably communication, and they're like, no, well, since it's not going through, I want my money back. Well, they said by the contract, but I didn't know that. That's your agent. So yeah.
So what Justin is saying is, buyer and seller in a sales contract, and one of the parties either breached or something like that, and they say, I want my money back anyway, and maybe they don't understand, they can't get it back, is what he said, but anyway, they say, I want my money back. Contractual terms say, you don't get it back if you breach. But guys, if the two parties are disputing that, the escrow agent, if it's the BIC or an attorney, whoever it is, they cannot release the money to either party unless those two parties who are disputing sign off on it. Now, there are two alternatives. If the two parties don't agree and sign off on who gets the money, the broker in charge can just let that money sit there indefinitely until they work it out. A better alternative would be send them written notice. You've got 90 days to come to an agreement. If not, we will send it to the clerk of court in the county where the property is located. They will keep it there for 1 year, and so that would be your recourse. Go through the clerk of court, see if you can navigate the channels there, and see if you can work that out. But they'll keep it there for 1 year, and then do you remember it escheats to North Carolina Treasury after that.
Does the arbitration clause not have anything to do with that? I know when people sign like a seller's agreement, they usually have an arbitration clause in there that says they'll try to go to arbitration before there's a lawsuit.
That clause is between the seller and the real estate
Okay,
broker.
nothing to do with the funds.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with the buyer. Or the buyer, if they had an agreement, buyer agreement with the agent, let's mediate instead of arbitrate. That's a good, do y'all remember that? It's in the listing agreement and the buyer agreement. Instead of us like making it all public and known that we're fighting each other, let's agree to just talk it out before it goes that far. Hopefully that would have happened before it goes to the clerk of court. And once it gets there, it would be up to the persons who want it to pursue it then, not the agent. All righty, page 636 and 637. If you haven't read over this section about BPO or CMA, it would be worth reading over. Now, we have talked about it. It was in your reading, maybe in Unit 8. According to the Real Estate Commission, a BPO or CMA term really can be used interchangeably. So if you get a question, they'll probably ask the question and have it written like CMA/BPO. In other words, meaning it means about the same thing. Now, Real estate agents might see it a little bit differently, and it's in your reading too. In the real estate business, when we get a call from an owner of the property to come out and help them decide on what their property should sell for, the term we use typically is CMA, a comparative market analysis. If a third party, like a bank, calls you up and they're thinking about foreclosure or this or that, and they ask you to give a price, they're probably calling it a BPO. But basically, it's about the same thing. If it's a BPO, the Real Estate Commission says that you can just quote one price. This property's worth $100,000. Typically, on a CMA, we come in with a range because we're not an appraiser, we're not that expert. So, owner, we think your property would bring $95,000 to $100,000, and the seller chooses what they want to list or ask for the property. A BPO, there's some things that we have to know about it. One thing is that we cannot do a BPO, or even a CMA for that matter, because the words are interchangeable, and use the terminology value. As a real estate broker, you are not determining value. You are looking for probably where it will sell for, right? And so if someone asks you to do a BPO and they say, we need for you to tell us the value for this divorce, or we need to tell you the value the two parties are trying to split it up, you can't do it because you're not an appraiser. You can't use those words. It cannot be interpreted as to be used instead of an appraisal that way. You do remember that a provisional broker cannot be paid to do a broker price opinion. Y'all remember that? Right? I don't know that I taught this. I think it was Wayne. Did Wayne talk to you about the BPO when he taught that night? Well, if I were on PB status and I got a call from BB&T, somebody I know there, and they asked me to do a BPO, and they say to me, and we'll pay you $100 to do it, I'm going to ask my broker in charge, may I do this for free? Because I know I can't get paid to do it because I'm on provisional status, but I want to do it anyway. This is a possible contact person for me, and I'm not going to be provisional forever. I don't want to lose this contact, so can I do it for free? Now, in the reading in here, it says anybody can do them for free. I said since I'm a provisional broker under the supervision of a BIC, I would want to make sure that they're okay with it before I just started doing it. That's just my opinion about that. What do y'all think?
I agree.
I would want to make sure because the BIC is responsible for anything that I do. One thing I think is interesting, look on your right-hand column on 636 about middle ways down, use of income analogy, methodology, now required where appropriate. So if this request is looking at an investment property, if they're asking you to look at an investment property, you are to know how to do that income approach. Remember, we talked about it several times. The potential gross income minus vacancy minus operating expense equals net operating income. You're supposed to understand how to do that as a real estate broker. And if it's in the request, maybe not every time that would be in a request, but if it is, you're supposed to know how to do that. All righty. Comments, questions? Okay. Let's go find some other things here. Disciplinary action we talked about. Real Estate Commission authority we talked about. Requirements for active license, unlicensed assistant, trust monies. Let's look at the broker in charge duties. So let's find that in this section. 630. Guys, we only have a few more things to talk about. On page 630, we did talk about the broker in charge. In order to designate, you would have to be a full broker known as non-provisional. You would have to have at least 2 years full-time experience within the previous 5 years, or the equivalent 4 years part-time experience. Each company must have a BIC. Now, if you'll look with me, second paragraph in your left column, look at number 4. Exception to BIC requirement of certain firms. I want to just point out a word to you, because it doesn't tell you much about this in this section.
Can you
There-
repeat where that is? I'm sorry.
I'm on 630, second paragraph, and if you look at number 4 in parentheses, they're talking about qualifying broker. That's the word I want to tell you about. Qualifying broker. Every real estate firm must have a broker in charge, right? Every real estate firm must have what they call a qualifying broker. Now, in this section, it doesn't elaborate on what a qualifying broker does, but let me give you some information about that. The qualifying broker at any real estate firm, or even if you're a sole proprietor, is someone that has a financial interest in the company. So it would be somebody like the president, like the vice president, like a manager, someone like that would be named could serve as a qualifying broker. The qualifying broker would have to be a full broker. They're not the BIC in most companies, but they are the person who is responsible that if the broker in charge were to leave your company, what if the broker in charge died suddenly? Somebody has to step in and check out the trust account, and that's what the qualifying broker does. So the qualifying broker will step in, make sure that this trust account is reconciled and up to date and in order, and sure, you're going to bring in another broker in charge, or else the company would have to close down if there are provisional brokers there, right? But the qualifying broker has a financial interest in the firm.
Is there a certain amount of time that, like, say, the broker in charge does die, is there a certain amount of time where they have to replace the broker in charge with another broker in charge?
Immediately.
Immediately.
Did you hear the question? Shannon said, what if the broker in charge at that location passed away? Is there a time frame on replacing, and it's immediately? So I've had students ask me before, how many brokers in charge does a real estate company have? 1 per location. But don't you think they've got full brokers there that would qualify to step in to be the broker in charge immediately? Because if you don't, PBs go inactive because they have to have a BIC. And so it could be a disaster. So I'm sure companies make arrangement. If this happens, we're going to tap you in there and get you to be the BIC. So qualifying broker is that.
Is that
So
another reason why they allow the person to be a broker in charge first before they take the courses?
you can be a yeah, that makes sense. What Neffy's saying is, you can declare on a proper form to the real estate commission that you want to be the broker in charge. Then the commission says you've got 120 days to take the broker in charge course. That's a perfect example. What if the BIC needs to be replaced? You got to get somebody in there, and they might not have had that course, right? And so designate to the commission, now you are the BIC, and now you've got to take that 12-hour broker in charge course, which is a whole lot about trust account, within 120 days, right? There is well, let me say this before I forget. Sole proprietors who are doing business in their own name, they would have to be BIC of themselves. So what if you wanted to open your own company in your own name? You got to have a BIC, and it can be yourself. You can say, I want to be the BIC of myself, as long as you're a full broker, as long as you've got at least 2 years full-time experience. You can be the BIC of yourself. And the commission's going to say you need a qualifying broker too, and you can be a qualifying broker of yourself. Kristen, your daddy is. He's the BIC of himself and the qualifying broker. Oh, she is? Your mama is now? Good for him. He delegated it out. Good for your mama.
Sharing liability here.
But he was at one time. He was the sole proprietor, he did business, and he was the BIC over himself and the qualifying broker. I remember when he did that. And now Kristen's mom has got her real estate license. All righty, let's talk about one other thing, and then we're gonna look at agency agreements real quick. On page 631, left-hand column, I want you to remind yourself what some other things that a broker in charge is responsible for. Well, they supervise PBs, right? They're responsible for the trust account if the company has one, and they're responsible for the entire operation of that location. So that means they would be responsible for the brokers who are there, not PBs, making sure that they get their continuing ed, make sure they renew their license, make sure that they take their post-education. Wouldn't that be running the office there? So they're responsible for everything in regard to that office, even the employees and even the bookkeeper and all that. Now, I want you to look at this term called broker in charge eligible. What does that sound like to you? Because I'll tell you what it sounds like to me, and we're both going to be wrong probably, but tell me what broker in charge eligible sounds like to you.
It can be revoked.
Are they eligible to be one, they still have the 120 days test to go through?
So they're eligible to be a broker in charge.
Like
Okay,
they
well,
completed their 2 years, they are now eligible.
well, it doesn't mean that. But Marcus, that's the way I interpret it too. I think it's confusing. The Real Estate Commission is getting ready to define the word differently. Here's what it means. If you are a broker in charge at a real estate company, and maybe you got real sick and you needed to step down, so you want to be relieved of that designation. As long as you take your continuing ed that a broker in charge is supposed to take every year, it's the update, but it's for brokers in charge, and an elective, 8 hours just like you and me. As long as they continue to take their education, they remain eligible to step back in that role. So broker in charge eligible really means you've been a BIC before and you can step back into another BIC role. To me, it sounds like I'm eligible to be a broker in charge because I'm a full broker and I've got experience, and that's not what it means. It means you were a BIC, maybe you're not now. You can keep your eligibility by taking the broker in charge update and taking the elective every year, and if you wanted to step back in that role, you could. That's what it means, which is a little confusing. And that definition, or the way we understand it, the commission, when we were at the last instructor meeting, they said that was going to be redefined to make it make more sense. Because, let me tell you why it's confusing. Every year during CE, we teach the broker in charge update class called Backup, only for brokers in charge. Only for brokers in charge who are eligible. So it's called broker in charge eligible. You would be surprised, it's confusing terminology. When people call licensees to sign up for a course, we do try to make sure they're in the right course. And our question is always, if Justin called and said, I want to sign up for the BIC-UP course, the broker in charge update, we are going to say, are you a broker in charge? Because it's not you won't get credit for it if you're not. Are you a broker in charge? And he says, well, no, I'm not. I just thought I could do that. Are you broker in charge eligible? In other words, have you been a broker in charge before? You can take this course and get credit for it. Guys, sometimes people get in the wrong course and they won't get credit for it. And we try to help people keep straight, but it's really up to the licensee to know what course they're supposed to take. So we really try, are you sure this is the course that you need? And if the student's been here for continuing ed, we can go into our database and say, here's what you've been taking, not that course, general update every year. So are you sure you need to take the broker in charge course? So we try to help students and licensee to stay straight, but it's a little bit confusing, I think. All righty, bottom of page 631, right-hand column. Drafting legal instruments, you know you can't do it, right? Guys, so that means you're really not gonna change any pre-printed forms because that could be construed as drafting. We know that the commission has rules on what can go in an offer to purchase. And remember, it's Rule 112, and there are 19 things. Do you remember that? Let me show you where it is in your book so you can go back and look at it. Page 298. 298, Commission Rule 112. The commission says we can't tell you what contract form to use, and we're not going to tell you what form to use. But whatever contract form you choose to use, address these 19 issues at least. Everyone, the sales contract that we studied is 13 pages, isn't it? The sales contract that we studied has 26, 25 provisions. It's more than 19. The commission says make sure you're addressing these issues, and if you look over it, they all make sense. Who's the buyer? Who's the seller? What's the legal description? Look at number 19 and look at B, boy. You may not put in the offer to purchase any kind of anything about your commission. You cannot type in there, seller to pay 3% commission, seller to pay 2.5%. That does not belong in the offer to purchase. Why not? Because it goes on the listing agreement, it goes on the buyer agreement, because it's employment. It's not between the buyer and seller. Commission is between the client and the firm, isn't it? It's not something the seller and buyer are negotiating. And then the other one is, you don't want to have any kind of disclaimer about liability, because we are liable, aren't we? Scoot over to 632, please. Remember the residential property disclosure statement? Justin was talking about this tonight, I think. That is a form for most residential property. Everyone, this form, the commission wrote this form, but it's a state mandate. The state of North Carolina gave that job to the commission. Please write this form, this language, because sellers should disclose, or, yeah, that's the way to say it. Sellers should disclose on this form the condition of the property, and the buyer should have it before they make an offer. Now, we're still a caveat emptor state, aren't we? So the seller does not have to disclose. But they do have to fill in this form, and if you go back and look at it in Unit 8, the choices the buyer has, they can say, yes, the furnace is working. They can say, no, the furnace is not working. Or they can say no representation, which means they don't want to answer the question, maybe because they don't know. And they don't want to go out on a limb and have the wrong answer, because if they had the wrong answer, it's misrepresentation. Everyone, the seller doesn't have to disclose material facts, but they can't misrepresent. Okay?
It could be a finance thing, right?
What?
It could be a financial thing as well.
On the property disclosure?
I mean, as far as, because let's say there's something wrong with some part of the house, and it may require an inspection or something. You know what I mean? I know.
I know. The idea is excellent. You know, we buy houses, we make offers on houses before we even know the condition. So the idea is, let's give the buyer a quick look. Here's how old the roof is. Here's the condition of this, so they've got some information before they make an offer. Sellers can say NR. You, as a real estate broker, are not to advise them on how to fill it in. You are not to fill it in, but it is your job to say, seller, you must fill this in and sign it. There are exemptions to that. New construction, you're not going to have the builder filling that in. That'd be silly. How old is the roof? It's new. What about the furnace? It's new. What about, it's new? So that'd be kind of silly, wouldn't it? So it's for used homes. And then there are some other exemptions too. But go to the bottom left, broker's responsibility for closing statements. Now you tell me what it is. What is your responsibility for closing statements? Now, they really don't call it a closing statement anymore. What do they call it? No, I don't know if I'm hearing it.
What is it?
What? Disclosure, Kevin said, is called closing disclosure. That's what it's called. I don't guess you'd go to real estate jail by saying, a statement. All right, so what are your responsibilities about that though, Justin?
They get their, statement three days, well, the buyer 3 days before, the statement.
All righty, okay, stop right there with that. Justin said that the buyer is supposed to see this closing disclosure at least 3 days before closing. That's a true statement, isn't it? Is it your responsibility though? It's the lender's responsibility. But if you're a buyer's agent, wouldn't you want to call your buyer and say, did you get that disclosure? Because we can't close if you don't have it at least 3 days before closing. Guys, your job is to look over the numbers. You know, we've done proration in here. We know whose closing costs belong to what the seller pays, what the buyer pays. Your job is to review over those numbers, and you use the sales contract to verify it. For example, if the sales contract, the seller agreed to pay $2,500 toward buyer's closing cost, I'm going to review over the sales contract. If I'm the seller's agent, really both agents should. If I'm the listing agent and I'm going to look over the contract, they agree to pay $2,500 of buyer's closing cost. If the buyer's closing costs are $2,200, that's the number that should be on the closing disclosure, not $2,500. Tell me if that makes sense. They agree to pay $2,500 of closing costs, but if there aren't closing costs that add up to $2,500, why would the seller pay $2,500? So you need to understand, we're not giving you a $300 extra credit. We agreed to pay your closing costs up to, and if they add up to $2,200, those are numbers you need to check. You also need to kind of do the proration. Are these proration numbers correct? Is it debited to the right person or credited to the right person? Is it in the right column? So those are things you need to be able to look at. Now let me give a little add-on. If you see the disclosure, you know, we may not see both parts of the disclosure. You may see only the seller's side, or the sellers if you're a listing agent. You may see only the buyers if you're a buyer's agent. So whatever you see, you are to review and make sure everything looks right. Go with me to page 624. Now, I want you to look at this agency agreement and disclosure. Look with me at the bottom right of 624, right-hand column. I would remember that all agency agreements that are with the owner of the property must be in writing at the beginning. Are you with me on that? Listing agreement cannot be verbal, must be in writing at the beginning. Property management agreement must be in writing at the beginning. So if you look at the bottom right, these written agency agreements must have a definite expiration date. So if you have a listing agreement, you know it must be in writing. I'm on the bottom of 624. It must have an expiration date, which cannot automatically renew. Everybody remember that? Which agency agreement can renew? Which one can renew? Property management agreement. That's the one agreement that can automatically renew. And the reason is, think about the type of relationship this is. It's long-term, isn't it? It can automatically renew as long as either party has a right to terminate it Listing agreements may not automatically renew. Buyer agreements may not automatically renew. You need to have the non-discrimination language in that agency. We talked about that last night. And if you'll look at the top left of 625, the licensee must have their license number on that agency agreement. Everybody pretty good on that? We talked about the disclosure of agency. Page 625, look at your heading to the right, disclosure of agency status by sellers, agents, and sub-agents to prospective buyers. That's a mouthful, and what does that mean?
First what do you call it again?
First substantial?
Substantial contact, yeah. Pretty much, we should sit down and disclose with them what our relationship is going to be.
Alrighty, so this is, I represent the seller. I am to disclose to the prospective buyer that I will be a seller sub, right? Guys, you might not have your brochure with you right now. On the back panel of the brochure, there's a section at the very bottom that says, disclosure of seller sub-agency, complete if applicable. That's a funny word. I don't know, I just started thinking about apples and peanut butter. Great minds, great minds.
Right.
So when showing you this property and assisting you, this agent will represent the seller, the agent and the firm. When are you a seller sub?
If the buyer.
Well, that's a good answer, when you're not a buyer agent. Aren't you a seller sub automatically for your real estate firms, clients, all the clients? So if you get a cold call, my humble opinion is, if that person wants to look at the property, I'm probably gonna talk about the agency and say, I'm a seller sub showing you this property. Because I would imagine just meeting somebody, you haven't had a chance to build rapport, they don't know you. I think it would be a little odd that they say, I want you to be my buyer's agent. The whole point is it needs to be in writing. So if you are a seller sub, guys, that means the buyer's a customer, doesn't it? There's no form that a buyer customer ever signs, but they need to initial this, that you told them you're a seller sub. And by the way, there's another section on the back that they would be taking with them. Remember, they take the big part of the brochure. On the back of the brochure, you're also putting it there because they'll take it home with them. You keep this perforated form in your file for how long?
3 years.
3 years from the ending of the transaction. So as soon as the transaction is concluded, we're supposed to keep 3 years. Elliot?
Can you quickly discern between seller, buyer, and listing and seller synonymous?
No.
I didn't think so.
Wait a minute. Listing, okay, let me put up here. I think I know what's confusing. When we see the terminology selling agent, most of us think that's the seller's agent. The selling agent has the buyer. So the listing agent has the seller. The selling agent has the buyer. And that is confusing a little bit.
So who's
And,
the buyer's agent?
well, selling agent.
Okay. So those are synonymous, buyer agent and selling agent.
No, it's not synonymous. All right, let me explain to you. Whoever brings the buyer is called the selling agent. Can't you bring a buyer and represent the seller? So we can't say the selling agent equals the buyer's agent.
Okay.
The selling agent could be a buyer's agent, or the selling agent could be a seller sub-agent. But the selling agent sells it, they have the buyer. It doesn't mean they represent the buyer. Does that make sense? Elliot? Well,
Show them on Teams.
because your own team, well, the selling agent brings the buyer, they're selling this property, but this agent could be really representing the seller as far as agency goes.
So the buyer's agent could be either of those, is that correct?
Not the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent would represent the buyer, and they would be the selling agent. But whoever is selling the property could have a buyer customer. And if the buyer's a customer, they will be a seller sub.
Okay.
So when you meet with a buyer, you're asking them, do you want to be a customer or a client? I can show you houses even if you're a customer. I can sell you a property and I will be called the selling agent, but I won't be representing you unless you want me to represent you. Does that make sense? So selling agent isn't automatically a buyer agent, okay?
So just to confirm, the selling agent does not have to stand in the shoes of the buyer.
That's correct. Selling agent does not have to be a buyer's agent. Selling agent could be dual agent. Selling agent could be seller sub-agent.
What's the determining factor then for compensation?
Doesn't matter. The commission's gonna be split, listing side, selling side. The listing's always split 4 ways. In other words, if the listing firm A got the seller, they negotiated the commission, and let's just say 6% to list the property, and this commission will be split to whoever sells it. It doesn't matter if the buyer is a client or a customer, we will share this commission with the selling agent. Doesn't matter if it's a buyer agent or not. So if it's 2 companies, this company would get, if they split it halfway, there's no rule that it has to be. This company would keep 3, and this company would get 3. This company has an agent, an individual agent, so the company would get part of the 3, the sub-agent would get part of the 3. This company, this is company B, they would get part of the 3, and whoever found the buyer individually, no matter who they represent, the individual, let's just say you would get part of the 3. So the commission is always split 4 ways. Even if it's in-house. What if you found a listing and you worked for company A? And then let's say that Elliot worked for company A too, and he brings a buyer. It doesn't matter the agency, the commission will be split 2 ways, the listing side and the selling side. It'll be the same company get a cut out of both, but there'll be 2 different real estate individual agents that gets a cut too. Does that make sense? It's always going to be split 4 ways.
So-
Even if you, Kevin, listed and sold the property yourself, there's a list side, somebody brought the seller. There's a sale side, somebody brought the buyer. It could be you. So you'll get a part of the listing side of the commission and the company will. You'll get a part of the selling side of the commission and the company will. It's always split. Who brought the seller, who brought the buyer, whether it's in-house or out-house.
So if you're a buyer's agent, a listing agent can refuse to split commission with you?
No, I didn't say that, did I?
But is it optional?
No, not if it's in MLS. If it's in MLS, remember we cooperate in MLS, and on the data sheet it's going to say we will co-broker with companies and we will share our commission and pay you.
What if they decide not to do that?
It would be a violation of MLS. If you are a realtor, you have to join MLS, because how else are you going to get access to to houses, and how are you going to get exposure for your seller's listing? So if your property is in MLS, you have to put what kind of cooperation you will offer and what kind of money you will pay. It must be in there. But I would remember there's always a listing side and there's always a selling side. And it doesn't matter about who represents who really. There's a seller and a buyer in there. And so there's 2 sides.
So pretty much, if it's a dual agency and on the cut was like 6, and the listing was 6% commission. And they said whoever brought the buyer would get 2%, we get 4%. And let's say it's in-house, and so the whole 6% go to the
firm.
To the firm, but then from that 2% that the buyer brought or in-house, he would get his cut from that 2%.
That's right.
And they'll get their cut from
If
that.
it was split that way,
Oh, okay.
that would be right. All righty, let's finish up, everybody. I'm looking for where it says it's in your, in this section about advertising, and it brings up blind ad. Let's finish up on that, because I want to send you home with a test for you to practice, and it's a really good test. Blind ad.
628,
628.
second paragraph.
Oh, I see. Guys, 628, just a couple of more things, everyone. 628, left-hand column. What is a blind ad? Okay, let's get together, we only have a few more minutes. Tell me what a blind ad is, and it's against license law, by the way.
Not putting the firm,
What?
is it not putting the firm's name on there?
Not putting the firm's name or a broker. You could be a sole proprietor doing business in your name, right? And so not having the firm or the, a broker's name in the ad because it would be misleading. A blind ad is misleading. So you've got to have the firm's name in the ad. A student asked me one time, well, do you have to put the phone number? There's not a rule to put the phone number, but don't you want somebody to call you? So most of us would put the phone number. There's not a rule about that. The blind ad is you're advertising and the person doesn't really know who they're calling. You're advertising, and also in this section it says you cannot advertise in the name of your principal. Think about it. What if you had, who's somebody famous that lives around here?
Richard Petty.
Richard Petty lives around here. Did I tell you his grandson took my class? Richard Petty lives around here. If you listed Richard Petty's property, you're not going to say, this is Richard Petty's property in an ad. That would not be proper. Would not be proper. So blind ad, no, that'd be a violation. If you're advertising, you got to have your firm's name in the ad. Think about it when you ride around town and see real estate signs. Isn't it the company sign? And then you might see a name rider, we call it, with the individual person who brought the business to the firm.
What about the We Buy Ugly Houses sign? That just has a number on it.
Well, they're not real estate agents.
What about
Okay.
those by ugly?
Yeah, they're
They
just
buy ugly
people.
houses.
That's what they do.
What? You had a question? Here's what reminds me of a blind ad. We were driving down Battleground Avenue one day, and there was a sign on this post, I guess it's a telephone pole, some kind of post, and it said, call this number, earn 6 figures. Doing what? Who is this? I mean, I don't know. Guys, that's a blind ad. It's misleading, you don't know who you're calling, and that's weird, isn't it? All right, when we get together Monday, here's the idea, everybody. The idea is for you to be ready to take your exam Wednesday. So I would think that you'll be zeroing in on your final exam review. When we get together Monday, this is what I'm going to go over.